There's a kind of silence that comes right before you lose your respect for yourself. It's quiet, heavy, and usually arrives after one too many times of letting someone talk over you, laugh at you, or dismiss your feelings like they're trivial. And the worst part is, you start believing maybe they're right. Maybe you are too sensitive. Maybe you do overthink. But that voice inside you, the one that still flinches every time someone crosses the line, that's not weakness. That's your integrity begging you to stop shrinking. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist persists." And in the context of toxic people, that resistance often means pretending their behavior doesn't bother you. You suppress. You stay polite. You play calm while your self-respect quietly bleeds out. Jung would tell you, the only way to reclaim yourself is through awareness, becoming brutally conscious of what's happening inside you when you're around them. Because toxic people don't just insult you directly, they infect the atmosphere of your mind. They make you doubt the rightness of your reactions. They twist your boundaries until they look like overreactions. You respect yourself in front of them, not by fighting louder, but by no longer needing to prove your worth to the unworthy. That's where it begins. When you walk into a room with someone toxic, they're already scanning for weaknesses. They're experts at emotional reconnaissance, studying your tone, your eyes, your posture. They don't care about truth. They care about leverage. Jung believed the unconscious projects what it cannot own. So when a toxic person calls you too sensitive, what they're really saying is, "I can't bear the weight of my own cruelty." The insult is a confession, disguised as a criticism. To respect yourself in those moments, you must see through the mask. Don't argue, don't defend. Look at them as if you're observing a psychological pattern rather than a person. When you stop reacting, you stop feeding the projection. You stop being their mirror, and they lose control of the game. But this requires something uncomfortable: detachment. Jung called it holding the tension of opposites. It's the ability to be fully aware of what's happening without collapsing into it emotionally. You recognize their manipulation, but you don't let it define you. You feel the sting of their words, but you don't internalize the poison. You hold both the pain and the power without losing balance. Most people fail here because they think respect is about getting others to treat them well. It's not. It's about refusing to betray yourself, even when others do. You can't make toxic people change, but you can make their poison irrelevant. That's real strength, the kind that radiates quietly, like gravity. People sense it, and the ones who rely on chaos will begin to avoid you. Not because you've become aggressive, but because you've become untouchable. There's a reason toxic people test you. They want to see how deep your identity goes. Do you bend easily? Do you rush to explain yourself? Do you crumble when guilt is used against you? Jung said that our shadow, the parts of us we repress, often hides the exact traits we need most. And if you've been surrounded by toxic people long enough, chances are your shadow holds your self-respect hostage. You've buried your anger, your authority, your right to say no, because at some point, those things made you a target. But that's the irony. What made you a target is what also makes you powerful. Your empathy, your honesty, your loyalty, these are strengths until they're weaponized against you. Jung would say the path to individuation, to becoming whole, is to reclaim those qualities and use them consciously instead of reactively. So the next time someone belittles you, instead of shrinking or snapping, take a breath and ask yourself, what is this moment trying to show me about my boundaries? Toxic people are like mirrors coated in dirt. They still reflect, but unclearly. If you clean the mirror by becoming aware of your emotional reactions, you'll start to see not them, but yourself. And once you truly see yourself, you won't tolerate disrespect, not because you're defensive, but because it becomes incompatible with who you are. Respect isn't loud. It's not a speech, it's not a comeback, it's presence. It's that unspoken energy when you know you could respond, but you choose not to. Because you're not trying to win anymore, you've already won by keeping your peace. But peace doesn't mean weakness. Jung warned about what he called inflation of goodness. When people identify too strongly with being nice, kind, or spiritual, they become easy prey for manipulation. The toxic person senses it. They'll provoke you, push your patience, twist your words, until you either explode or break down. That's their feeding cycle. They thrive on emotional reaction. And when you finally give in, they call you unstable. It's a trap. To escape it, you must let go of the obsession with being seen as good, because that image will chain you. Jung's insight was that true morality comes from integration, not performance. When you embrace both your light and your shadow, your compassion and your ferocity, you stop needing external validation. You stop explaining yourself to people who distort everything anyway. That's when self-respect becomes effortless. Imagine someone accusing you unfairly. The old you might have spent hours clarifying, over-explaining, even apologizing for things you didn't do, just to keep the peace. But the new you, the Jungian you, pauses. You don't rush to fill the silence. You let their words hang in the air, heavy and unanswered. That's psychological judo. You're using their own energy against them. Because silence, in the right hands, is more powerful than defense. And that silence teaches people something profound. You're not available for manipulation. You're not going to play their emotional games. They can scream, twist, guilt trip, but they can't touch your center. Jung called this state self-possession. It's not arrogance. It's spiritual authority, the knowing that your worth doesn't depend on other people's recognition. But let's be honest, this isn't easy, especially if you grew up around toxic dynamics, where love was conditional and respect was earned through compliance. You were taught that keeping everyone happy was survival. That's why standing your ground now feels like danger. It activates old wiring. But this is where your real work begins. Jung said the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And that means disappointing people who benefit from your self-betrayal. The process of learning to respect yourself in front of toxic people is not about confrontation. It's about transformation. It's about realizing that your silence can be a sword, your calm can be armor, and your self-awareness is the ultimate power move. Because when you finally stop trying to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you, something extraordinary happens. You start to feel free. And that freedom has a strange effect. It intimidates the very people who used to control you. They can't figure out why their tactics stopped working. They'll call you cold, distant, selfish. But those are just the screams of someone losing access to your energy. Jung would call it the withdrawal of projections. When you stop carrying other people's darkness, they're forced to face it themselves. And that's their nightmare, not yours. You'll notice it one day. The tension you used to feel in your chest around them will vanish. You'll no longer rehearse what to say. You'll just be calm, grounded, unmoved. That's what self-respect feels like. It's not fireworks, it's quiet conviction. You've integrated the parts of you that used to split under pressure. You've become whole. And the truth is, once you reach that point, toxic people no longer scare you. They bore you. Their games feel predictable. Their power transparent. You start to see that their cruelty is not strength, it's fear wearing armor. And from that awareness, you stop reacting with pain and start responding with understanding. Not forgiveness in the sentimental sense, but in the psychological one. The realization that they are trapped in themselves and you are no longer trapped with them. That's what it means to respect yourself in front of toxic people, to stop needing their validation, to stop fighting for your dignity, and to simply exist as someone who cannot be diminished by their presence. Because when you understand yourself deeply enough, their behavior becomes noise, and you, finally, become silence. There's a strange calm that comes when you finally stop explaining yourself to people who have no interest in understanding you. It feels almost empty at first, like something's missing. The urge to justify, to smooth things over, to prove your innocence, it's gone. And that silence feels foreign, even scary. But that emptiness? That's the space where your self-respect starts to grow. Carl Jung believed that the first stage of individuation, the journey to becoming whole, requires separating yourself from the unconscious influence of others. Most people don't realize how much of their behavior is dictated by invisible emotional debts. You tolerate the toxic friend because you feel guilty for leaving. You let your boss humiliate you because you fear being seen as ungrateful. You let your partner manipulate you because you confuse attachment with loyalty. These are not choices of self-respect, they're survival reflexes that once kept you safe but now keep you small. Jung would say that until you bring those hidden dynamics into awareness, they control you. You think you're being kind, patient, or understanding, when really, you're being ruled by fear of rejection. You think you're choosing peace, but you're actually avoiding conflict. That's why self-respect often begins with disobedience. The moment you decide to stop betraying yourself just to maintain false harmony, everything changes. But this change doesn't look powerful at first. It looks quiet, awkward. You'll say no, and your voice might tremble. You'll hold your boundary and immediately feel guilty. You'll watch someone get angry with you, and your body will want to collapse. That's okay. Respecting yourself in front of toxic people feels wrong before it feels right. Because for most of your life, you were rewarded for self-abandonment. You were praised for being mature, understanding, the bigger person. But those were just polite words for compliant. The world has a funny way of romanticizing self-sacrifice while secretly worshiping power. And toxic people know this. They exploit it. They thrive on your desire to be good. Jung once wrote that when you over-identify with goodness, you create an equally strong shadow of resentment. That's why some people suddenly explode after years of patience. They were never actually peaceful, just repressed. So how do you respect yourself without swinging between extremes, between silence and rage, submission and rebellion? The answer lies in what Jung called integration. It means accepting that both sides of you, the calm and the furious, the forgiving and the fed up, are part of one whole. You don't reject the anger that arises when you're disrespected. You listen to it. You let it inform you, not control you. When you're around toxic people, your body always knows before your mind does. You'll feel that tightness in your chest, that subtle draining sensation, that pressure to say something you don't mean. That's not weakness, it's data. Your nervous system is reporting that you're in an unsafe environment. Self-respect means you don't override that data anymore. You act on it. You end the conversation early. You excuse yourself from the room. You choose discomfort in the short term over damage in the long term. And this is where you start confusing toxic people. Because they're used to control through prediction, they expect you to react, explain, or cave. When you don't, they lose their script. They'll accuse you of arrogance. They'll play the victim. They'll say you've changed. And they're right. You have. You've started listening to the voice that used to whisper but now speaks clearly. Enough. That voice is the beginning of your real identity. It's not your personality, the polite surface you show the world. It's your center. Jung would call it the self, the organizing principle of the psyche. And toxic people are drawn to those who are disconnected from that center because they can easily impose their will there. But once you reconnect with it, once you start honoring your boundaries as sacred rather than negotiable, they lose access. Think of every moment you didn't stand up for yourself as a small fracture. Over time, those fractures spread until your sense of worth feels unstable. Respecting yourself is the process of sealing those cracks, one boundary at a time. You stop saying it's fine when it's not. You stop accepting half apologies. You stop laughing off insults disguised as jokes. And you begin to realize something profound. Every time you tolerate disrespect, you teach your subconscious that your comfort is less important than someone else's approval. Jung would argue that the unconscious keeps score. Even when you pretend you're okay, your psyche knows when you've compromised your integrity. And it will show up later as anxiety, resentment, or self-doubt. That's why reclaiming respect starts with truth. The truth of how you actually feel in someone's presence. The truth of what you've been pretending not to notice. The truth that maybe you've been living too long in emotional debt, paying interest to people who never deserved your energy. When you start honoring that truth, people will notice. Some will respect it. Others will try to test it. They'll say things like, "You've become distant," or "You're acting weird lately." What they really mean is, you're no longer easy to manipulate. Don't take their discomfort as a sign you're doing something wrong. Take it as confirmation that you're evolving. Respect, in Jungian terms, is not just behavioral, it's energetic. It's the way you carry yourself when no one's watching. It's how you sit in a room where someone tries to dominate you and still feel unshaken inside. It's when you stop over-explaining your boundaries because they're no longer up for debate. Toxic people interpret that energy as threat, but what they're actually feeling is their own insecurity reflected back at them. You're not intimidating, they're intimidated. Because your calm presence exposes the chaos they hide behind charm or aggression. And when you stop playing their game, you break the unspoken contract of emotional dependency that kept the dynamic alive. That's why most toxic relationships don't end with closure, they end with confusion. They fade out because the manipulator runs out of control, and without control, they lose interest. That's when you'll start seeing the deeper layers of this transformation. Respecting yourself isn't just about avoiding disrespect, it's about redefining the way you relate to life itself. Jung believed that when a person individuates, they no longer live reactively, they live intentionally. And that shift ripples into everything: your friendships, your work, your voice, even the way you walk into a room. Suddenly you notice that you don't chase validation the way you used to. You don't force conversations. You don't apologize for existing. You move slower, but more deliberately. You pause before reacting. You speak less, but with more weight. And it's not that you've become cold, it's that you've become clear. Clarity is magnetic. It attracts those who are aligned and repels those who feed on confusion. That's why your peace will start to make some people restless. They'll try to provoke you just to see if they can pull you back into the old emotional dance. But here's the secret. When you stop needing to prove you're good, you become untouchable. You don't seek revenge. You don't justify. You don't explain. You just continue being yourself, unbothered. That's psychological dominance, not over others but over your own reactivity. And the beauty of that dominance is that it doesn't need an audience. Jung would say that when you reclaim your projection, when you stop seeing others as the source of your pain, you return to your own power. You no longer try to fix, please, or convert anyone. You simply live in alignment with your values, and that alignment creates a field of respect around you. Toxic people sense it, and instinctively, they retreat. At first, you'll think it's coincidence. You'll wonder why certain people stop calling, why others seem uncomfortable around you. But it's not rejection, it's energetic selection. Your vibration has changed. You're no longer a match for manipulation. And the space they leave behind? That's where real relationships start to grow. People who value truth, depth, and mutual respect will find you, because you've stopped broadcasting insecurity and started radiating sovereignty. That's what Jung meant when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Respecting yourself is how you take the wheel back. You stop being a character in other people's dramas and become the author of your own. And the more you live from that place, the less you even think about toxic people. They fade into the background noise of the world, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of knowing that your peace is no longer negotiable. Because once you learn to respect yourself in front of them, you'll never again need their approval. You'll already have your own. At some point, you'll realize that the way you used to crave respect from others was really just a reflection of how little you gave it to yourself. You tolerated their moods, their sarcasm, their disregard, not because you didn't see it, but because a part of you still believed you needed to earn love through endurance. Jung would call that a shadow contract, an unconscious agreement you made long ago. If I am patient enough, kind enough, forgiving enough, then maybe I'll finally be worthy. But the truth is, the people who demand your tolerance rarely offer you theirs. And no amount of endurance will ever be enough for someone who feeds off your compliance. The moment you recognize that, something in you snaps, but not in anger. It's more like clarity. You finally see that the person who keeps crossing your boundaries isn't doing it because they misunderstand you. They're doing it because they know you'll let them. That's when self-respect shifts from being an idea into a practice. It stops being about confidence and starts being about consequences. When a toxic person realizes their manipulation no longer guarantees access, they panic. You'll see it. Their tone changes. Suddenly they act confused, distant, or overly nice. They're recalibrating, testing your limits again. Don't mistake that niceness for remorse. It's just another strategy. Jung said the psyche resists change because the ego fears death. In toxic dynamics, that ego isn't just in them, it's also in you. Because letting go of how you used to respond, explaining, appeasing, smoothing things over, feels like losing control. But in truth, it's the opposite. You're not losing control. You're losing chaos. And without chaos, you start to hear yourself again. The real you, the one who's been buried under layers of guilt and habit, finally speaks. At first, that voice is uncertain. It doesn't roar, it whispers. You don't have to go. You don't owe them that. You can walk away. And when you listen, you start to experience something almost sacred. The peace that comes from being internally aligned. Jung believed that the unconscious speaks through symbols and feelings. So when you respect yourself, your life starts symbolizing that inner alignment. You'll notice your environment change. Maybe you declutter your space or stop replying to people who drain you. You'll find yourself drawn to solitude, not because you're lonely, but because you're no longer performing for anyone. That's individuation in motion, the process of becoming your own authority. But that authority must be tested. And toxic people are the perfect examiners. They will challenge your boundaries, your silence, your newfound stillness. They'll throw subtle bait, sarcasm, guilt, nostalgia, just to pull you back into the old dynamic. And that's when your self-respect will either collapse or crystallize. Because the test isn't about them, it's about your consistency. Here's what most people misunderstand. Boundaries are not walls. They're mirrors. They reflect who you've become. When you say, "I'm not available for that anymore," you're not punishing anyone. You're defining yourself. You're saying, "This is who I am now." Jung would call that a confrontation with the shadow, because every time you assert a boundary, you confront your own fear of rejection. You meet the part of you that still wants to be liked, even by the people who disrespect you. And every time you choose respect over approval, that shadow shrinks. There's an incredible calm that follows. You stop reacting to every insult, every microaggression. You realize you don't need to prove that you're right. You just need to remain grounded in your truth. And that truth has weight. Toxic people feel it. It's not something you say, it's something you emanate. They sense that your energy no longer bends. That's why the most powerful form of self-respect is often mistaken for arrogance. You're not being superior, you've just stopped negotiating your worth. But let's be honest, this peace can be lonely. When you start honoring yourself, you'll outgrow more people than you expect. It hurts. You'll miss them, even if they were harmful. Because what you really miss is the old version of you, the one who didn't know better yet. You'll think, maybe I was too harsh, or maybe I should give them another chance. That's the nostalgia of your lower self, begging for the familiarity of dysfunction. But growth always feels like loss in the beginning. Jung said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Losing people who thrived on your self-neglect is that pain. Yet the reward is unmatched. As your boundaries solidify, your energy starts attracting a different frequency of people. Those who don't demand your silence. Those who don't flinch at your authenticity. You'll find conversations that don't exhaust you. Relationships that don't require emotional acrobatics. Respect will become your default currency. You'll stop asking, why do people treat me like this? And start realizing, I no longer attract those who do. This shift isn't just psychological, it's energetic. When Jung spoke about the individuation process, he often described it as a reorganization of psychic energy. In simpler terms, when you stop pouring energy into people who deplete you, that same energy transforms into confidence. You walk differently. You speak differently. You even breathe differently. You stop bracing for impact in every conversation because you trust yourself to handle whatever comes. That trust, quiet, unwavering, is the foundation of true self-respect. But here's the catch. It's not permanent unless maintained. Toxic people may resurface. They'll sense your stability, and try to test it again, just to see if it's real. And this time, your reaction determines everything. Will you fall back into explaining yourself, or will you let the silence do the talking? Jung said that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off parts of yourself, but by integrating them. So you don't need to suppress your empathy or your warmth to protect yourself. You just need to integrate them with discernment. Compassion without boundaries is self-destruction. But compassion with clarity, that's power. It's a strange paradox. The more you respect yourself, the less you need to talk about it. You stop announcing boundaries because they're evident in your demeanor. You stop demanding respect because your energy makes it non-negotiable. And in that space, something miraculous happens. You begin to feel safe in your own presence. You stop seeking validation externally because your own mind has become a trustworthy place to live. That's when toxic people truly lose control over you, not when you block them, but when you no longer need to. When their words can't penetrate, when their disapproval no longer stings, when their chaos no longer hooks your nervous system. That's freedom. It's not loud, not cinematic. It's quiet. It feels like walking through the same storm that used to drown you, only this time you're dry. Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." That choice, to become self-respecting in a world that profits from your self-doubt, is the bravest act of rebellion. Because you're not just standing up to toxic people, you're standing up to every inner voice that ever told you to settle, to explain, to endure. You're breaking the cycle, not by fighting, but by transcending. And as you keep doing that day after day, something extraordinary unfolds. The people who once intimidated you will seem small. Their approval will feel irrelevant. Their absence will feel like oxygen. You'll stop walking into rooms hoping to be liked and start walking into rooms knowing you belong. That's when self-respect becomes more than a mindset. It becomes your aura. It's the unspoken energy that precedes you, the calm confidence that says, "I am not here to perform. I am here to exist." And that, more than any defense, more than any comeback, is what truly disarms toxicity. Because you've become something their manipulation can't survive. A person who knows their own worth. And when you finally reach that point, when your worth is no longer a negotiation, you begin to notice how differently life itself treats you. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. The energy you once spent managing other people's chaos now returns to you, and with it comes something rare: clarity. You start to see the subtle patterns that used to trap you, the emotional traps, the guilt trips, the fake kindness that always came with a hidden hook. You see them, and for the first time you don't fall for them, you just smile. You've become conscious of what once controlled you. Carl Jung would say that's the moment the unconscious becomes illuminated, the moment you see the archetypes that play out in everyday life. The victim, the manipulator, the savior, the child. These roles lose their power when you stop identifying with any of them. You're no longer the person trying to prove you're good. You're no longer the one trying to fix everyone. You've stepped out of the script completely. And in doing so, you finally meet yourself, not the image you project, not the version others prefer, but the authentic core that's been waiting for permission to live. That authenticity radiates in ways that can't be faked. It's in your stillness, in your pauses, in how you look someone in the eye without flinching. Toxic people sense it instinctively. Their manipulation has nowhere to land. Because manipulation only works on the unconscious. It needs blind spots, insecurities, and guilt to survive. Once you've brought those things into awareness, they lose their grip. You see their tactics like bad theater, predictable, and dull. And when you no longer react, they no longer perform. But this isn't just about defeating toxic people. It's about evolving beyond the need to fight them at all. Jung wrote that what you resist, you strengthen. The more you define yourself in opposition to someone, the more you're tied to them. That's why real power comes not from revenge or confrontation, but from indifference. Not emotional coldness, but psychological distance. You don't hate them, you outgrow them. You no longer need to prove anything, because your existence itself becomes proof. That's when your presence starts commanding respect naturally. People feel it. They may not even understand why, They listen when you speak or why they hesitate before crossing your boundaries. It's not because you threaten them, but because you've mastered yourself. Jung said the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And that's exactly what you've done. You've looked at every part of yourself, the anger, the fear, the resentment, the softness, and made peace with it. There's no longer a wound for others to exploit. But you must understand, self-respect isn't a destination. It's a daily discipline. Every day you'll face small choices that either reinforce your integrity or erode it. Do you answer that message out of guilt? Do you let someone talk over you again just to keep the peace? Or do you hold the uncomfortable silence until they realize your quiet is not compliance, it's boundary? Each of these moments becomes a mirror reflecting who you're becoming. And over time, those small acts of alignment add up. They build a new identity, one that no longer flinches under pressure. People will notice, but they'll misinterpret it. Some will call you distant. Others will say you've changed. But the truth is, you've just returned to yourself. You're not distant, you're discerning. You're not cold, you're contained. You've stopped scattering your energy in all directions and started directing it inward, toward your own growth. There's a deep strength in that inwardness. You begin to understand the value of solitude, not as isolation, but as restoration. When you're alone now, you don't spiral into overthinking. You recharge. You feel safe with your own company. That's how you know you've built real respect. You no longer need others to mirror it back. Jung described individuation as becoming a circle whose center is everywhere and circumference nowhere. In modern terms, it means this: you become self-sustaining. Your worth is no longer outsourced. And from that space, even your interactions change. When someone tries to provoke you, you respond with calm observation. You no longer take their behavior personally because you understand projection. You can see when someone's pain is talking, and you no longer absorb it. You listen, you acknowledge, but you don't carry it home. That's mastery, not of others, but of your own boundaries. It's what Jung meant when he said, knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. And it's true, you can only handle toxic energy once you've faced your own. Because as long as you're at war with your shadow, you'll keep attracting people who embody it for you. The narcissist mirrors your buried need for control. The manipulator mirrors your fear of confrontation. The critic mirrors your own self-judgment. Every toxic relationship you've had was a teacher, showing you the parts of yourself you needed to reclaim. And when you do, the lesson ends. You'll notice it in your reactions first. The things that used to trigger you now just pass through. The people who once intimidated you now seem strangely harmless. Their power fades because you're no longer lending them your emotional energy. Respect has rewired your nervous system. You don't live in fight or flight anymore. You live in awareness. And that awareness is contagious. The right people will feel safer around you, more open, more authentic. Because when you respect yourself, you unconsciously give others permission to do the same. You set a new standard, not through words but through energy. You don't demand respect. You demonstrate it. You don't lecture about boundaries. You embody them. You don't announce your worth. You live it. That's when life begins to mirror your inner transformation. The conversations deepen. The noise fades. You stop chasing opportunities and start attracting them. You stop explaining your value because your work, your presence, your very being speaks louder than any justification ever could. Jung said that when a person becomes aligned with their true self, the external world starts reorganizing around them. What once felt like struggle now feels like flow. The right people appear. The wrong ones quietly drift away. And you realize something profound. Self-respect was never about standing tall in front of toxic people. It was about remembering you never had to bow in the first place. You were always enough. You just forgot. You let the world convince you that humility meant silence, that kindness meant self-erasure, that love meant endurance. But Jung would remind you True respect begins the moment you refuse to participate in your own diminishment. So, when you walk into a room now, you don't shrink and you don't inflate. You simply exist, fully, unapologetically. And in that existence, there's power. Not the kind that dominates, but the kind that transforms. Because when you respect yourself deeply enough, even the toxic realize they can no longer touch what has become whole.